Well, good morning. I think Jenna has just opened the floodgates, so to speak. Looks like there are a number of you. Welcome back after a season of being away. And I'm very happy to get started again for yet another year. I guess this is getting to be close to 20 years that we've been doing this. So this is really pretty cool. For some of you that are new, I'll kind of start off with what others of you who are not new have heard me say kind of each year. First of all, I'll start off by thanking the foundation for hosting these, and certainly Daniela Kerner, who is the executive director, and Jenna, who really is behind the scenes and makes everything work. So I want to thank all them and encourage those of you who aren't already members of the foundation to consider joining the foundation. They certainly can use their support, your support, to be able to provide this kind of programming and all the other wonderful and marvelous things that they provide. Certainly with my love of the environment, but then also the love of all kinds of art. And as I have said in the past, and I remind when I talk to the kids down there on the island, that really art and science are kind of knit together in that they both start with observations. So our finest scientists are those that have observed things first and then wonder how did that work? And our fine artists and amateur artists and beginning artists look at something and say, how can I recreate that either in words with poetry or a painting or a drawing or sculpture or pottery or whatever. So first it's observation and then it's art or science. So I see the two of them coming together. And then the beauty of nature that we're always trying to recreate is something certainly that we ought to take care of. So that's where the environmental aspects come in. We need to take care of our planet Earth. And I often muse, we really perhaps should be calling this planet water because we are 75% water and 25% Earth. So there's a lot more water around here. And that also is what gives it its unique appearance when they're seeing pictures of it from the moon or from a satellite or something like that. Anyhow, so that's how all these things tie together. In my presentation, I'm going to touch on sort of our goal is really to stimulate thought, stimulate conversation, provide knowledge that would encourage us all to then participate in some level of science and certainly some level of art as well. Um, so we'll be talking a little bit more about those kinds of opportunities. I also want to acknowledge and thank Darlene Cavalier, who has stepped in, and Darlene will be the actual MC at many of the presentations this year. I've got a few things going on in my life that will probably call me away on Saturdays, so I won't be here every Saturday, but Darlene will be here, and she comes with great capabilities and then also Ben Worst. Ben has been so involved in the foundation and the bird blind, and he's really what I refer to as the father of our marsh trail. Um, I I long ago managed to figure out a way to put the walkway out there, but Ben was the one that created the walk to the walkway, and a number of different work projects and volunteer efforts have gone into that. So I certainly want to acknowledge Ben, and we'll be hearing from Ben a little later on this year, talking about ospreys and the many things that he's involved in. So we want to do that. Um, and we have a nice lineup for this year. Be running until April the 11th. And I'm not going to take the time to run over the different um, topics just now. You'll be getting emails with all of them listed. We have a couple that are yet to be determined, so we'll just kind of go with that. Final housekeeping. I will present my stuff, be talking about Reclaim the Bay and some of the things we'll be doing at the foundation, and then we'll open it up for discussion, maybe some ideas about other topics since since our schedule runs to April the 11th, we would have time, if there are a couple other topics that people are interested in, to have after the 11th. And I think we did that last year. I know we've done that in some years in the past. So when I open it up, we'll have everybody muted for my presentation, and then after that, we'll open it up for questions and comments. So let me get started. We've got the kickoff for 2026. And in today's session, I'm going to talk a little bit about this year, kind of what I've been saying. What you're going to see in my presentations, I've got two parts to my presentation. One's going to be about reclaim the bay, and the other's going to be about oysters in the bay. And I'm going to explain how these presentations were put together with AI. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. It's kind of interesting. So as I said, for about the past 15 years, what we've really been trying to do is to stimulate interest and knowledge and get people involved. So we want to turn you from viewers into doers, and that's the since boy, I can't talk this morning. The citizen science part that we're looking for, because citizens, just through their day-to-day observations, can see what's happening with our environment and a lot of other things, and look at what are some of the signs that even a non-scientific person could observe to see what's happening. For example, the global warming. Now, I know that our president has said that there is no such thing, and we don't want to be the least bit political, but I have an awful lot of empirical data that tends to make me believe that it is not a scam, that it is real. And I just submit this observation to the most casual, non-scientific observer. Things are getting warmer, and people are wearing less clothes. But to get back to a little more serious behavior, um, what we've expressed several times, and certainly last year we got into it a little more deeply, is being able to participate in projects where your observations of nature can be fulfilling to you, but what you are observing can also be useful to scientists who are gathering data to be able to provide greater and deeper understanding of the environment in which we live, the care for that environment, and hopefully even the improvement of that. And we have had a great partner in something that Darlene Cavalier started, this SciStarter. And out at the SciStarter website are links to all kinds of projects. And we, in fact, have a little mini site out there to help you understand the different projects that you could get involved in. So there's a healthy dose of reality here in observing and then using our observations to support the work of scientists. So that's where our citizen scientists meet the real scientists. So I'm going to be giving you a couple of presentations, and I want to expose you all to something that is truly astounding. I was saying to Jenna, it's jaw-dropping. Everybody's worried about AI and what it's going to do and one thing or another. But as a practical use of I used it to generate two presentations that I'm going to show you today. And I used a thing that is called Notebook LM, and it's part of the suite of things that you get as part of your Google account. What Notebook LM enables you to do is to feed information to it, and then it takes the information and turns it into whatever you want, a report, a deck of slides, a podcast. It's truly, truly amazing, and I can't wait to show you. But so here is what the Notebook LM homepage looks like. And if we click on one of them, This is going to be one of the examples I'm going to show you. Here's the screen that you're met with. Over here on the left, you can feed it information. So what I did was I took a PDF that was the annual report for Reclaim the Bay as my source information, and I put it over here on the left-hand side. I then turned it on, and the first thing it did was to analyze what I had and come back with a brief statement of this 4-page report. Then over here on the side, you can see I can turn it into an audio. I can turn it into a slide presentation, a slide deck, and here are those different things that I had the AI do. Now, where this is important is those of you who might want to make your observations. You want to take pictures of a bunch of different birds that you saw up at Barnegat Light at the inlet, and you want to make a little story about that. And so you identified the birds and maybe you listened to their sounds and you did those things and you created a brief text of the day that you did it and what the conditions were and one thing or another. You put that into a document, go here, upload it, and it will make a slide presentation for you. Or it would turn that into a report and show the pictures that would fit with the report. You can even go to a variety of websites with support information on the little thing that you're putting together and feed those websites the URLs for the content, not just the whole website, but the URL with the content, and feed that to it, and it will incorporate that into the presentation. So, as I was talking to Darlene about it, what we were saying was who's going to be harmed by this? Well, since she's a professor, she was saying, well, grad students who perhaps might be taking a professor's tome and are going to turn that into a presentation for the professor, they're not going to have that job because the professor's just going to feed his tome into this and boom, done. However, as we got talking about, I said, yeah, well, that grad student, since nobody has all the time they want to create their research project, the professor might have said, oh, well, there's part of this. I just haven't had a chance to get into it. But now the grad student could be maybe taking the week to do a little bit further research on that question rather than spending the week trying to create the report or create the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to go back to my slide presentation to you, and then I'm going to show you how this worked. So the first one I'm going to do is this report from Reclaim the Bay. It was 4 pages long, written by the president, Bill Walsh, and then reviewed by the board. Has a few pictures in it. Yeah, it's kind of a nice thing. I put that into the notebook LM and came up with a slide deck. These are the slides that it created. These are not my pictures or pictures from the report that Bill did. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but just you can see the level of detail. Look at it threw in a map of LBI. It went out and got the map. In that, Bill had talked a little bit about oysters and reproduction of oysters, and we have triploids and diploids. It went out and found these pictures, and it inserted this text that was actually in the PDF that Bill put together. He talked about oyster castles. It went out and created this artwork for oyster castles. And then it called the things that Reclaim the Bay was doing pillars of action. That was their terminology. And it came up with this nifty little cycle and recycling of clamshells and talking about the different things that we did. Unbelievable. So it took this from that 4-page presentation. And then I said, make a slideshow for me. So this is 5 minutes. I'm going to show you the slideshow that was generated. You'll learn about Reclaim the Bay, and you'll also see what artificial intelligence can do.
Well, Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a local organization that has one of the absolute best names I've ever come across, and as you'll see, an impact that is just as impressive. Okay, let's just start with that name, because honestly, it tells you pretty much everything you need to know. It's spelled RECLAM, reclaim. And yeah, this isn't just some clever pun, it's their entire mission statement, their whole philosophy wrapped up in one brilliant word. They aren't just reclaiming the bay, they are literally, physically, reclaiming it. So here's how we're going to break it all down today. We'll start with that mission, then look back at their amazing 20-year history, unpack the science behind what they do, see how the community is the real engine behind it all, and finally, take a peek at what's coming next. All right, so let's dig into that. What does it really mean to reclaim the bay? Let's get right to the heart of it. So, their whole deal, their identity, is this laser focus on one specific part of the ecosystem shellfish. By raising and planting clams and oysters, they're basically putting these tiny natural filters back to work, building a healthier bay for everybody. It's all about making sure future generations can enjoy the coast too. Okay, so that's the mission, but how has it actually played out over the past 20 years? Well, let's get into the numbers because they are pretty wild. First up, and this one is just wow. In 2 decades, they have raised and planted over 32 million shellfish directly into local bays. That's not a typo. 32 million of these little ecosystem engineers put to work cleaning the water. It's just astonishing. So, how on earth do you get to a number that big? Well, you do it with people, a whole lot of them. We're talking more than 100,000 hours of dedicated volunteer work. This is truly a story of a community just rolling up their sleeves and getting it done. And what's the value of all that hard work? This number just blows me away. When you add everything up, the volunteers, the restoration, the science, their cumulative estimated impact on the bay is a staggering $4.5 million. But it's not just about the big numbers, right? Their impact goes way deeper. I mean, they've reached over 12,000 school kids, hosted more than 500 community events, and they even published a book detailing the whole history of their first 2 decades of work. So the results are incredible. But the big question is, how do they do it? It's this really cool mix of hands on, get your boots wet restoration and some serious cutting edge science. A huge piece of the puzzle is that they're investing in the next generation of scientists. Through grants and internships, they're helping students answer the really tough questions, like using GIS mapping to find the best spots for new shellfish, or analyzing water quality to create the perfect recipe for oyster growth. And then there's the stuff they're doing on the ground or, in the water. They are literally building new habitats, partnering with state agencies on surveys and new leases, and even kicking off a shell recycling program with local restaurants. And get this, they're part of an initiative called Stop the Sting, where people actually scrub docks to manually remove jellyfish polyps. How cool is that? Now, what's really amazing to me is how this super science focused organization is also like the absolute heart and soul of their local community. They've figured out how to fuse hard data with pure passion. They are seriously living this double life. One day, their volunteers are out on a boat doing these technical scientific surveys. The next, they're building an award winning Christmas parade float. It's this awesome mix of lab coats and party hats, and it totally works. And nothing captures this better than their annual wooden jetty Christmas tree. People bring shells and write messages to loved ones they've lost, creating this beautiful memory tree. But here's the best part. Afterward, Reclaim the Bay collects those very shells to be used in building new oyster reefs. It's this powerful poetic cycle of memory and renewal. And they're not just about educating the public. They make sure their own members are constantly learning too. They're hosting screenings for environmental documentaries, organizing field trips to leading marine science labs and aquariums, the whole shebang. All right, so after 20 amazing years, what's next? What's on the horizon for them? First off, they're doubling down on the future. And by that, I mean the next generation of scientists. They're planning to double their budget for student scholarships and internships with a goal of hitting $20,000 in 2026. That is a huge commitment. And, planning for the future isn't always glamorous. They're also dealing with some real world logistics. Their current home base is getting renovated, so they're working with the town to find a new temporary spot so they can keep their vital work going without missing a beat. So when you take all of this in, the incredible numbers, the deep science, the community spirit, the forward thinking, it all brings up a pretty massive question, doesn't it? And it turns out the answer might be simpler than you'd think. For 20 years, Reclaim the Bay has shown us that sometimes the most powerful change starts small. It starts with a single shellfish, one clam at a time.
So that's what AI will do for you. And let me see if I can get back to the screen. So that's what AI can do. And remember, it all started that whole presentation. The voice is not a real person; it's AI. The excitement in his voice, I don't know how they do all this, but it all started from those 4 pages. So here comes AI. Item two. Some of you were introduced to a lady named Linda Peters last year and the year before. She lives well, she has a home on High Bar, and she's been doing a lot of oyster research. And it's really kind of cool because there is an oyster farm behind High Bar. Some of you know of it, and fellow that owns that is Matt Gregg. His company is 40 North, and he and his partner Scott have the Barnegat Oyster Collective, and they sell oysters to restaurants and one thing or another. Very knowledgeable guy. Well, one of the kind of a side story is when Reclaim the Bay. And for those of you who don't know, the reason there's so much emphasis in my talk about that organization is I was the founder of it 20 years ago. And the organization's still alive and very well, and maybe a little better without me. I'm not sure. But I'm still quite involved in it. Anyhow, Matt Gregg was a student at University of Rhode Island and was studying marine biology, wanted to someday have an oyster farm. And he interned for Reclaim the Bay back when we were first getting started. Very interested, very dedicated, and he got to live his dream. He got to start the oyster farm and then the oyster collective. Great guy. Well, his one of his farms is not far from where Linda Peters lives. And one of the things that Linda wanted to understand better was how the spat from the uh, oyster farm that's just floating in our bay could create more oysters and oyster reefs. So she started studying that and has for 5 years at least that I know of. And she put together quite a report with 97 slides in it. And some of the slides have text in them, and they have pictures of the things that she's seen and recognized what some of the problems were, and so forth, so on and so forth. So I took Linda's presentation and I put it into my notebook LM and wanted to come up with 97 slides is about an hour and 20-minute presentation. Well, I wanted something for you all that would be less than that. So I turned to AI and said, see if you can do this. And let me see if this is hers. Yes. And the same thing, I fed her information in and I got reports out and one thing or another. But here's the slideshow.
All right, today we're jumping into a real life detective story. It all unfolds in the shallow waters of New Jersey's Barnegat Bay, where a crew of really dedicated citizen scientists spent years cracking a huge mystery. So, our story kicks off right here, in this beautiful but pretty fragile ecosystem. I mean, it looks great, but for decades, Barnegat Bay has kind of been like a patient in distress, sending out these quiet signals that something was very, very wrong. And a call for help went out, and we're going to follow the people who answered it. They weren't your typical lab coat scientists or marine biologists. No, they just became the Bay's doctors and nurses, and they were determined to figure out what was wrong and nurse it back to health. To really get what they were up against, you have to understand the crisis they were facing. For years, and I mean years, they saw the same heartbreaking cycle of failure over and over again. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. For more than 20 years, pretty much every single new generation of oysters in the area just disappeared. They'd show up and then bam, within 6 months, they were gone. This was the long-running crisis that kicked off this whole hands-on investigation. So, before they could even think about fixing anything, they had to put on their detective hats. Job number one: what in the world was killing all these oysters? And this picture right here just says it all, doesn't it? On the left, that's what you want to see: a healthy, thriving bunch of oysters. But on the right, well, that was the grim reality. That was the crime scene they kept finding: a graveyard of shells just smothered in this blanket of mud. After a whole lot of looking, they finally zeroed in on their prime suspect: silt. Yep, just plain old mud. The fine sediment floating around in the bay, that was the murder weapon. Any oyster that tipped over or couldn't stay upright was basically buried alive. Okay, so they knew what was happening: death by silt. The big question now was how. How could they give these little guys a fighting chance to survive and even thrive? It was time to head to the lab, or in this case, the shallows. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what they tried. Starting around 2020, they just started experimenting, learning from what worked, but, learning even more from what didn't. First up, they tried these observation cages. The logic was pretty simple, right? Let's give them a safe little box to grow in, protect them from the elements, and just see what happens. And look, the cages taught them some really important stuff. Like if you pack too many in, they don't grow well, and cleaner shells attract more baby oysters, which are called spat. But here was the kicker: they were only getting about 10 new spat per cage. It just wasn't enough. It wasn't the big solution they were looking for. So back to the drawing board. Plan B: shell bags. The idea here was to create a kind of stable, attractive apartment complex for the young oysters to settle down on. And at first, this looked really promising. Way more baby oysters than the cages, which felt like a huge win. But then, new problems popped up, and they were kind of gnarly. The oysters got so overcrowded, they started growing into these weird, deformed shapes right through the mesh. And even worse, after a couple of years, the bags themselves would fill up with that killer silt and just fall apart. They became part of the problem. Now, this is where the story gets really good, because it's a total accident, a routine check on one of these flawed experiments, that leads to the single biggest aha moment of the whole project. So picture this. It's October of 2021. The team is out there looking at all these messed up oysters and failing bags, and they decide, hey, let's just pull up one of the newer bags, one that's only a year old, and see what's up. And what they found inside was a total game changer. 107, not 10, not 20, 107 live, healthy, young oysters. It was an absolute jackpot. And that was it. That was the crucial clue. The problem wasn't the bags, it was how old the bags were. The older bags were useless, just clogged with silt. But the fresh one-year-old bags, they were prime real estate. They were perfect little spat magnets. So this discovery just lit a fire under them. They thought, okay, we know how to catch the babies now. So what if we could give every single one its own personal, permanent, mud-proof little house from day one? And what they came up with was just genius and so simple. They'd find a young oyster already on a small piece of shell, and then they'd cement just that little bit of shell, the base, into a big, heavy whelk shell. So the oyster itself is totally free, but now it's got this heavy-duty anchor keeping it upright and out of the mud. And here you can see the whole scientific method in action, right? Their first crack at this idea, trying to use eelgrass, it totally bombed. But the second try with the cement, a huge home run. These oysters weren't just surviving, they were having their own babies within 2 years. Okay, so let's see what all this hard work actually looks like. All that trial and error, all those failed experiments, it was all about to pay off big time. Just look at this. This is what it all led to. This is the High Bar Reef in 2024. It is not a silt-covered graveyard anymore. It is a dense, thriving city of vertical oysters, all standing tall, filtering water, and building a habitat that can sustain itself. And when the tide goes out, you can really see the massive scale of what they've accomplished. This whole landscape is just transformed. This isn't some temporary Band-Aid. It's a real, functioning, growing reef, and it's the direct result of years of patient detective work. So what's the big takeaway here? I mean, it's right there on the screen. The goal was never just about planting oysters. It was about training regular people to become scientists for their bay. And this whole story is just incredible proof that it works. It shows that the most essential tool for healing our planet isn't always a $1 million grant or a high-tech lab. It's curiosity, it's patience, and it's the refusal to give up when things don't work the first time. Which really makes you wonder, right? What problem in your own backyard is just waiting for a detective to solve it?
Okay. Well, that's a little about Reclaim the Bay, a little bit about um, Linda Peters' oyster uh, study, and a little bit about how AI can be used to put things together. I I do notice there are a few things in there that might be taken a little out of context or not. I wouldn't say inaccurate, but perhaps expressed not the way that I would express them. But by the way, whenever we've dealt with a professional writer, we've always had that same kind of problem. Let's unmute everybody and see if there are any questions about Reclaim the Bay, questions about Linda Peters' Oyster project, questions about things that you can do in making presentations using Notebook LM. And I see, Jenna, can you unmute? It looks like everybody is muted right now. So I want to unmute, and I'm looking for my control panel to see if anybody's raising their hand.
If anyone has a question, that you will be able to unmute yourselves, or you can raise your hand in the chat as well.
Wow, no questions, huh? Wow. I will throw in one little thing while we're waiting to see if any of you do have any questions. One of the things that about Linda's project, when we started Reclaim the Bay, we were very involved with local clam growers and ultimately oyster farmers. And what we believed was that not only was the bay in trouble because of a thing called eutrophication, that's too much nitrogen in it. Too much nitrogen causes too much algae to grow. The algae growth reduces the sunlight. The sunlight reduces the healthy vegetation on the bottom of the bay that everything, including clams and oysters and scallops, rely on. So we we believed that by putting more life in the bay, more shellfish in the bay, they would be eating the algae, the water would be clearer, the cycle would improve. And we started raising money to be able to buy clam seed to put seed clams out there. We hoped that our clams plus the farmers' clams would be filtering the water and would be improving things. Uh, I had a marine biologist PhD friend who became a friend uh, approached me one time after a presentation and said, Rick, with all due respect, you're never going to put enough shellfish in the bay to solve the problem. And I agreed with him. And I made the point that that slide presentation made that it's not the clams and oysters that are going to do all the work. It's the people who will plant the clams and oysters and will put less nitrogen in the bay and one thing or another that'll do the work. That's the whole point of Reclaim the Bay, really. Growing the clams and oysters is sort of a byproduct. However, one thing we did not count on, and that was the actually the speed with which the oyster industry grew in Barnegat Bay. When we started Reclaim the Bay, there were only a few oysters being grown down in the Mullica River. There just weren't any oyster farms in Manahawkin Bay, Barnegat Bay, or Little Egg Harbor Bay. Well, by 2017, there were 12 growers, and now today I think there are more than 25 growers. Why is that important? Well, back to what Linda is studying, and that is all those oyster farms, those oysters that are growing and getting ready to go to market are sexually active, so they are producing what does become spat, the additional life in the bay. So only are they feeding a market, they are also creating the life to put more oysters in the bay. And as Linda points out, oysters need something hard to sit on. Barnegat Bay, 90% of the bottom of the bay is silt. However, the shorelines frequently are not silt. They're not rock like the rock line bays of New England. However, they do have ribbed mussels, and ribbed mussels serve as a substrate for the oysters to be able to sit on, so they're above the silt, so on and so forth. And now many of the shoreline restoration projects include putting some hard surface there to attenuate the wave action, but then also provide habitat for oysters. So, in fact, we do grow oysters in bags that we put in and among those rocks as one of the mechanisms to attract the life cycle of the oysters that are protecting the shoreline. And the great thing about the oysters, of course, is that since they're alive, they are growing, and that's how they keep up with sea level rise. So the oyster reef is a growing, living thing, and they will continue to be at the breakwater edge, which breaks down the wave energy and one thing or another, protecting the marshes. So that's how all of that stuff gets related. Any questions? Jenna, do you see any questions in?
Hello,
I hear somebody.
Yes, Kevin.
it's Kevin McDermott, Search City. I was so very impressed with those two experiments that were done and how you ended up showing us using AI. Just amazing that you ended up the whole experiment and come up with the idea of using the bags. It's just so impressive the approach that you went through. I was also I've been following AI for a couple of years, and I've been looking for some practical examples of it. And this is the most impressive ones I've seen in a while. Going to that website that you had, what's the name of it? I forgot.
So, if you have a Google account,
Right.
when you go to your, I'm going to show you on the screen right now. When you go, when you go to your account, not
Google account. Yeah.
yeah, um, that's not what I want to be doing. Hang on a second, I'll get there. But I can't get to where I want to be. That's unbelievable. Anyhow, it is one of the apps that's in your Google account. So when you go to your apps, you know how you pull down your apps menu on
Right.
your Google account. Uh,
Right.
Look down there and you'll find one that says Notebook LM.
Notebook LM.
Yeah,
LM stands for
I don't know.
hmm, Notebook LM. Okay.
Yeah, no, and and by the way, talk about diversity. I so I I have my family genealogy and it's a bunch of aspirant notes and some, magazine articles about my dad and, all this and that. I put all that together. You would not believe the slide presentation that it put together on my family with pictures, and it's unbelievable. So from genealogy to scientific research,
Um,
whatever you put in there, you can get out.
Wonderful example of what AI can do. My gosh, very good.
Yeah, yeah,
Notebook LM. Thank you.
yep. Okay.
Kevin, to answer your question, LM stands for language model.
Great. Thank you. Language model.
And the other thing, by the way, while we're on that topic, the other thing that your Google account gives you is something called Gemini. and Gemini is
Right.
Google's take on Chat GPT.
Right.
Well, the great thing about that is that since it's a Google product, if you ask it questions about, let's say you're doing a spreadsheet, and you're like, how do I change the color in column C in my spreadsheet? You go to Gemini and it comes back and it tells you. And it's even conversant. So it'll tell you in a human voice. Um, so those of us that are working in technology and like, oh, geez, I got to go find somebody asked me how to do something on their iPhone. And like, oh, I got to figure that out. Well, I just go to Gemini and ask the question and it comes back with the answer. So yeah, that's another one. Okay, well, we don't have to prolong the agony here. Thank you all for participating. We will have a session next week. It'll be Jim Webster. He's the yeah night sky guy, and he's going to be talking about light pollution and some of those issues and some of the things that we can be observing in the night sky. Of course, when it got so cold the other nights, there was no moisture in the sky. Boy, could you see the moon and could you see the stars? It was it was pretty damn
Yes.
cold, but it was spectacular. So that'll be next week, and Darlene will be hosting, and we'll be reminding everybody about the SciStarter. In the meantime, stay warm, have a wonderful week, and see you all next week. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was very informative.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye,
Bye
Jenna.
now.